Mr. Rector, Professor Costa, professors, members of parliament, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. First of all, I thank you, Mr. Rector, for your nice words. But I'm impatient because I remind you the words of Chu Enlai when he was asked about his evaluation of the French Revolution in 1789. Of course, he said, history will judge later on. And then Chu Enlai, the former Chinese Prime Minister, said, too early to judge, he said, after 200 years. So I'm rather impatient, having in mind what Chu Enlai said about some major events in our history. It's always a pleasure. I'm happy. Always a pleasure to be back in the College of Europe and its surroundings. I'm not an alumnus of Bruges myself, but as a young man, a schoolboy, I eagerly read the articles and books of Professor Hendrik Brugmans, your predecessor, the college first rector. By the way, I'm reading one of his books I discovered recently. It's about the main dates in European history. The Westphalian Treaty, called the French Revolution, 1848, and so on. And then there's a last chapter about the 1979, the year which this book was published. And when you read this, before the fall of the Berlin Wall, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, you have really the feeling that we are living now not in another age, but in a new era, completely different from what was the year 1979. It's already history. History 30 years after the publication of that book. I also attended lectures in the 60s. I apologize, this public, in the 60s, you remember the 60s, centuries ago. In the surroundings of Bruges, in Sicily, I attended lectures of his good friend, a Franciscan father, Karel Verleijen. He died a few years ago. He's a co-founder also of this college. So I'm not an alumnus, but I consider myself a little bit as being very close to the college. It was therefore with pleasure that at the very start of my mandate here in Bruges, I delivered my first big political speech as European Council President in February 2010. My second major speech will take place now. Back then, I spoke about the challenges for Europe in a changing world. That was the title, The Challenges for Europe in a Changing World. It would be a fitting title again today. And what changes and challenges have we not seen in those 5 years? A euro country on the brink of bankruptcy, our common currency under massive strain, even at the brink of collapse, according to some. Youth unemployment on the rise, dramatically on the rise. Under Europe's south, popular revolts, remember the Arab Spring. Then afterwards, wars, and now barbarism. And to our east, the Ukrainian revolution of Maidan and its aftermath and all events which we are in part still grappling. I have been asked by the organizers to reflect on my 5 years in office, on how I shaped the function and what the challenges may be for the next president. I propose to offer 4 short series of reflections. First, on the economic crisis and the economy. Second, and briefly, some practical and institutional lessons concerning the office of European Council President. By the way, I was in Warsaw last week to teach my successor, Donald Tusk. And third, a few remarks on Europe's foreign policy, and finally, a wider reflection on how people experience Europe and how the Union can be more caring and more protecting. First, on the euro crisis. The economic and financial crisis is the indispensable starting point for both looking back and looking forward. The next 5 years will necessarily be influenced by the period we are leaving behind us. And the most important lesson of the Eurozone crisis is that we have realized the full extent of our interdependence, not only inside Europe, inside the Eurozone, but also on a global on a global scale. What happens in one of our countries can affect whole. The fate of a country of 10 million inhabitants has influenced the monetary zone of 350 million, and yes, even the global economy. The former Chinese president, when I was first in Beijing for the EU-China summit, he asked me, explain me the situation in Greece. China, 1.3 billion people. They were dependent on the fate of a country in Europe of 10 million inhabitants. That's the best evidence on the interdependence on a global scale. The exit of Greece would have signified the end of the Eurozone. And Chancellor Merkel once said that the collapse of the Euro, in the Eurozone would mean also a major blow, if not the collapse of the European Union itself, and the European Union, the biggest peace project in human history. Governments have realized all this interdependence, and it took them some time to do so. Public opinions have discovered it too, and for them it took even more time, which is natural. We overcame the existential threat to the Eurozone. We won the battle also against the Cassandras and the speculators. The structural reforms for sound budgets and sustainable debt are still vitally important today. And we cannot throw away the efforts and sacrifices that we made in order to let the Euro and the Eurozone survive. It's still a matter of credibility to maintain that course. The other important lesson from the crisis was that to deal with this interdependence, we needed, and still more Europe. Certainly more Europe in the Eurozone. And I know this is a paradoxical statement, because at the recent European elections it was about sometimes on less Europe. We need more Europe to make the Eurozone much more stable even in the decades to come. We must strengthen the economic and monetary union. Much of the work in the past years was aimed at this, and as a result we clearly have a stronger economic and monetary union today than 5 years ago. It's not difficult because there was nothing. With better budgetary and macroeconomic oversight, with rescue funds, and also starting next month with the European Central Bank overseeing all banks in the Eurozone, the first operational leg of Europe's banking union. But more will be needed, in particular on economic cooperation. You cannot have a common currency and 19 separate economic policies. If you have a common currency, you need also common policies. You need much more convergence in economic policies. A minimum of convergence is required. And here lies one of my regrets. It is no secret that personally on economic coordination I would have preferred to go further than we have been able to decide under my mandate. I put a proposal on the table which did not get enough support. It is no doubt one of the things that my successor will have to take up. One can ignore a solution, but one cannot ignore a problem. The current economic debate is elsewhere. The economic crisis is lasting longer than we had expected. Or rather, the recovery is more subdued than we had hoped. Why is this? Our structural economic growth is too low. So this is a long-term growth, the potential growth of our economies. This growth rate is 0.5% in the Eurozone now. 0.5%. It was 1 point higher before the financial crisis. On this basis, you cannot have a sustainable social model as we have in most of our countries. The structural economic growth is too low, and the structural unemployment rate is far too high. Productivity and competitiveness need to increase. Hence the importance of research and development, of education, of formation, and also of flexible labor markets. So the problems of growth, even 1.5 was too low. The problems of growth and the problems of unemployment, they existed before the financial crisis. This unemployment rate before 2008 was 9%. Now it is approximately 11 to 12%. But we had a very high structural unemployment rate before the financial crisis. And so if some are blaming the current leaders, they have to blame more even those, the predecessors, who didn't take action when we had economic growth of almost 2% in the period before the financial crisis. So we are tackling now existing problems that exist before 2008. Of course, in terms of competencies, most of these areas are a responsibility of the member states, of national governments and national parliaments. What we can do as a union is to give a push, to give a stimulus, to urge them. But at the end of the day, in terms of competencies, most of those areas are a responsibility for national governments and parliaments. Structural reforms are necessary in all countries, including in Germany. The world is in a permanent change. Nobody can allow himself to rest on yesterday's efforts or on today's laurels. Even if most of the work has to be done by countries individually, there is much we can do together as a union. First of all, to deepen the EU's internal market, in particular in the fields of services, energy. We speak about an energy union, the internet economy, the single digital market in Europe. As the academics know, EU countries also share a research area, which is home to the world's biggest research program, Horizon 2020. It is the biggest research program at a global level. It is a key driver for innovation and another area where we need more Europe. So we have to make full use of the potential of the single market, not only in terms of free movement, but also in creating new policies in energy, in research, in the digital economy, in industry, and so on. And now the big question is how to move forward without a climate of crisis, without a sense of urgency. Can Europe make qualitative jumps without a crisis? In a crisis, you have to act. You have the knife on your throat, your back against the wall, and the abyss in front of you. You have no choice. And we had no choice in the beginning of my mandate, in the beginning of the Eurozone crisis. Now we have to act without that pressure. And that's the big challenge for my successor and the successor at the helm of the European Commission. In the current economic debate, a lot of attention goes to the so-called demand side of the economy. Monetary policy and the role of the European Central Bank, the possibilities offered by budgetary policy. But as I said, we should not throw the achievements of all our countries' budgetary efforts away. The structural efforts to achieve sound and sustainable budgets must be continued. But the flexibilities within the Stability and Growth Pact should be optimally used, especially in a time of very limited real growth and very low inflation, which further increases the debt burden. So we are living now in an unprecedented economic situation. Not only low real economic growth, but almost no inflation. Even in some countries, and very recently a negative inflation. So we're living not only in a stagnation of the real economy, we are living in some way in a stagnation of the nominal GDP. That's rather unique. The European Commission has an important role to play in this respect in the weeks ahead. European leaders are all keenly aware of the enormous challenges we face. They are determined to tackle them because they know it is needed for their own countries as for Europe as a whole. In June, we exceptionally held part of the European Council meeting in Ypres, not too far from here, in West Flanders, to commemorate the outbreak of the First World War. And right after a solemn ceremony at the main gate, while still in Ypres, the European Council agreed on 5 priorities that will shape the European agenda for the next year. In a nutshell, the 5 priorities we agreed are stronger economies with more jobs, enabling societies to empower and protect all citizens, a secure energy and climate future, a trusted area of fundamental freedoms, and an effective joint action in the world. In the meantime, both President-elect Jean-Claude Juncker for the European Commission as well as Donald Tusk, my successor as European Council President, have made this agenda their own. On all these 5 points, we indicated concrete actions that should be taken. However, the Council's main purpose was not to go into details, but to set a direction for the legislative work in the next 5 years to achieve what people expect Europe to do. And that's what the treaty requires the European Council to do. So let me say a few words about, as promised, as asked, on the function of European Council President and how I shaped this office. Many of you will know, as students or alumni of Bruges, that the EU Treaty sets out the role and task of the European Council and its President in just a few lines. It does not have legislative power and does not get involved into executive management decisions. It is essentially a political body, not connected with the trias politica, a political body whose role is to set the overall direction, or in the treaty language, to provide the Union with the necessary impetus for its development and define its general political direction and priorities. The institution's vocation has developed in practice over its 40 years of existence, because there was a European Council before me, and there will be a European Council after me. Its main vocation is to keep out of day-to-day business, which the other EU institutions do much better with the well-tested framework of the so-called community method. Yet, be ready, we are ready to spring into action when special cases arise, changing the treaty, letting new members into the club, setting the budget, and also dealing with crisis. In the treaty and its blank spots, you will also notice that the European Council President has a relatively short mandate. They call it a permanent president, 2.5 years, permanent president. I have another definition of what permanent is. No budgetary responsibility, no administration of his own, and no right of appointment. What kind of frustration? A politician that cannot appoint people. He does have a small private office, a cabinet comparable in size to that of a Belgian Secretary of State, which, formally speaking, he does not even nominate himself. So I'm very frustrated. You have felt it from the start on of my speech. It is paradoxical. The European Council is generally considered to be the highest political authority in the Union, but the job description and formal competences of its president are rather vague, even meager. A lot, therefore, depends on what you do with it or make of it. I can put it differently. Everything what was not foreseen formally had to be created informally. For instance, and I will not go into further details, I had and still have a weekly breakfast meeting with the President of the Commission, a monthly meeting with the President of the Parliament, a monthly meeting of the so-called institutional actors, that means the 4 presidents in the EU institutions, the President of the Council, the Commission, the Eurogroup, and the European Central Bank. I've also made a point throughout my mandate of visiting all members of the European Council, so all presidents and prime ministers in their own capital, so once a year, in principle, but I kept my promises. And of course, there were many other informal contacts with key players. All of this helped to build trust. Trust is the main word in politics and also in European politics. And building trust is, in my view, perhaps the most important task of the European Council President. Building trust among leaders, among institutions, among countries. It's a basis for political decision making. And especially when decisions are difficult, which they all are at our level, otherwise ambassadors or ministers could have solved it. And when they have to be taken by consensus, as normally is the case in the European Council. We take all our decisions, with a few exceptions, unanimously, 28. So when you start a meeting and you have a look at the table, you know that at the end of the day, we have to agree with all 28. There is, and that's a happy thing, there is a culture of compromise in the European Council. They need, of course, a brilliant president of the Council. That's for sure. But the compromise culture helps a lot. Everybody sitting around the table knows that he has to agree at the end of the day, and certainly in a period of crisis. We cannot leave the meeting and say we had a very good discussion, an open and frank discussion. You know this diplomatic language for saying that we disagree completely. But we just can't afford this. We had to take decisions, sometimes a little bit too late, too little and too late, say something. But we agreed at the end of each meeting, making steps in the direction of a more definitive solution. Some say that the intergovernment method prevailed during those 5 years. The truth is that the Commission, the community institution par excellence, got unprecedented competencies on, for instance, the surveillance of fiscal policies and in other fields. My third chapter, Foreign Affairs, let me now turn to this topic. Whereas the first 2 to 3 years were dominated by the economic crisis, the last year the European Council's political attention shifted more to the world around us, and in particularly Ukraine. Obviously, the European Council became the central political body on foreign policy, as it was also on economic policy. The Ukraine crisis was and is the gravest threat to the European security order since the end of the Cold War. The invasion of Crimea last March marked a turning point. Of course, there were momentous events taking place in Ukraine before that, and there still are. But that was the watershed. As I said last week on the Union's behalf to the United Nations General Assembly, when you tamper with borders, you tamper with peace. Europe responded to this aggression and violation of international law with a wide range of sanctions, political, economic, and financial. And leaders knew this could hurt their own economies. But we did not relent, since the stability of the European house itself was at stake. And now the priority is to ensure the peace process launched in Minsk, that it advances, and that all parties respect the ceasefire and abide by the peace plan. We can rebuild trust also with Russia on one condition: if commitments are met. At the same time, it is essential that Ukraine's authorities move firmly forward on the path of reforms. Those reforms, economic, political, and constitutional, will determine the success of a lasting political solution. A new social contract, a fair balance between the parts and the whole, that's the best way to secure the country's future. EU countries and institutions are fully committed in supporting Ukraine along this path. And the association agreement, ratified 2 weeks ago by the Ukrainian Rada and the European Parliament in an historic simultaneous session, is a compass, an opportunity to help Ukraine transform into a dynamic, modern and open democracy its people deserve. The other big foreign policy is obviously to deal and contain the instability in the wider Middle East. It was the main topic also last week at the UN General Assembly and a great concern for all public opinions. What we have seen this summer has nothing to do with Islam. It is the return of barbaric ghosts from a long forgotten past. Horrendous deeds rejecting that we are one humankind, denying the very basic values of civilization. It is a fight of civilization against barbarism, not a fight of the so-called West against Islam. People fear that the world is changing for the worst. People also in these countries. They see that the very foundations of our living together are shaken. They see the rise of fanaticism and obscurantism, the return of a long-gone world. People have the feeling that we live in a very dangerous world. Dear students, professors, ladies and gentlemen, looking at the past years and at the disappointing economic situation, it is clear that Europe has not become popular during this crisis. Quite the contrary. Perhaps not always or not only for the reasons we think. And I will come back to that. But there also is a crisis of politics in general, at all levels. There even is a great malaise after the financial crisis, related to the way our economies work, to the distribution of wealth, of the tax burden, to the rise of inequality and poverty. And not to mention a fear for globalization, for migration, for the violence of fanatics. There is fear, Germans would call it Angst. Angst in our societies, also related to rising individualism and rising loneliness in all of our societies. And every day we must fight to turn this fear, this Angst, into hope. This is a much more complicated issue than simply an economic one. It is a much more complicated issue than simply a European one. It is a crisis of politics at all levels. For sure, there also is a specific European sub-dimension of the problem. But in my view, it is not just about institutions and elections. More fundamentally, it is worthwhile to look at how people perceive and relate to the Union, how they experience it, and I should like to develop this point to conclude. The starting point is a sad observation. It seems people today see Europe as a reason they feel powerless and without a say, whereas our Union was precisely built to make them stronger and regain a grip on their own history. One way to understand this public disenchantment better, as I set out last May in my Charlemagne speech in Aachen, is to see how our Union is above all experienced by people as a space and hardly ever as a place. Space and place are really not the same thing. A place brings protection, stability, and belonging. It is a home where people feel at home. A space, on the other hand, opens up movement and possibilities. It's about direction, speed, and time. And all human beings, we need both. A space in which to fly, and a nest we can call ours. We are very simple creatures. We need a space and we need a place. And with Europe, our focus has always been on space. Just think about it. From the very start, the typical action was to remove borders for goods, workers, investment, to let people and companies move, take initiatives, seize opportunities. Even today, on fields as diverse as energy, telecom, or the digital economy, It is still about bringing down borders, creating this big common space, this big common market. But we've never really thought of Europe as a home, a shelter, and today we pay a price for it. For decades, it worked well. The open borders brought huge opportunities for working, trading, studying abroad. And the impact of all the opening was mostly cushioned by economic growth and by the welfare states set up in parallel. Crucially, this division of labor through all these years was that Europe opened and national governments and parliaments protected. Nobody expected otherwise. But things have changed. Globalization has put the welfare states under strain, and the crisis forced European Union institutions into a new role. The result is a dramatic and rapid shift, whereas for decades Europe had been all about opening, liberating, unlocking, emancipating, empowering. Today it is suddenly seen as meddling, judging, prescribing, dictating, correcting, or even punishing. Europe, the great opener of opportunities, is now perceived by many as an unwelcome intruder. The friend of freedom and space is seen as a threat to protection and place. We need to get the balance right. It is essential for the Union to be also on the protecting side. It is urgent for the Union not to be seen as only benefiting business but also employees, not only the movers but also the stayers, not only those with diplomas and language skills but all citizens. And people not only as consumers who like cheap products and a wide choice but also as workers who can see in others competitors for their jobs. How to get this balance right? When it comes to protection, people expect two things from the European Union. First, for problems that individual countries are clearly not big enough to fight on their own, that the Union steps in. And on the global and cross-border issues, people really want Europe to defend their interests and keep threats at bay. And second, where national authorities are best placed to provide care, people expect that the Union does not get in the way. Indeed, there are cases where precisely because of its scale, the Union must tread softly, not disrupt, but respect familiar places of protection and belonging, from national welfare choices to regional traditions and identities, all the way down to local cheese. From this perspective, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, the citizens' message to the Union is clear. The Union must be stronger outside, be more caring inside. For me, this is one of the main challenges ahead to regain people's confidence in our Union, and I have full confidence that the new leadership team will address these important responsibilities head on. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your second major speech at the College of Europe, as you promised us. If I may just say, in terms of opening up different perspectives on Europe, fresh perspectives on Europe, in terms of making us reflect about the foundations of Europe, I think you are part of the youth of Europe, Mr. President. So I think no one could have addressed this conference in a more encouraging, stimulating, and reflecting mode, Mr. President. I am most grateful. President Van Rompuy has kindly agreed also to take a few questions, if you still have time. Do we have a microphone? A mobile one? Just a moment. Yes. There is one question over there. There's one question over there.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the culture of compromise in the Council. Has David Cameron's attempt to block the appointment of Jean-Claude Juncker as President of the Commission damaged that culture of compromise, or is it recoverable?
Please use the opportunity.
Mr. President, thank you very much for this amazing speech, and thank you very much for visiting our college. I'm from Georgia, and I'm very interested in your ideas whether the Georgia has the real perspective for become a member of the European Union family. And also, thank you very much for this support for the association agreements which Georgia has recently experienced.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your speech. I'm the President of the European Confederation of Young Entrepreneurs. You talked about Ukraine. What are your thoughts on the defense union in Europe, and how do you think this defense union could be stronger over the next 5 years?
This what? This?
The defense union, the military cooperation of the EU member states. How can it get stronger and can enhance the European common foreign policy?
Yeah, just one last question. I would like to hear some insights from your side about what are the next steps with the relation with Russia. If Russia does not go back in its steps with Crimea, what are the future negotiations between the European Union and Russia? Are the sanctions going to continue? How do we fix this problem with Russia, which is always going to be there as our neighbor, and they're not going anywhere?
Yeah, so the last one, yeah, no, but the very last one. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm coming from Serbia, and you haven't actually spoken a lot about enlargement and us, the last ones that still have not joined the European family. And we're experiencing the historical low desire not to join the EU rising from nationalist parties and everything in the country. So how do we address those issues, and how do we keep the spirit of Europe, and how do we make people who do not feel that Europe is their home, how do we make them feel that Europe is their home? Do we make them, or how do we approach the whole issue? Thank you.
Thank you. I will try to answer those questions. First of all, on the UK. I had slightly the ambition that you are not British? Yeah. So the Georgians are asking questions on Georgia, the Serbs on Serbia, and the British on Britain. So I will give you a European answer. First of all, of course, the UK is an important member of the European Union, but is not a member of the Eurozone and not a member of the Schengen zone. So they have a special position right from the start on. Second is that we are working in a unanimous way, as I said. And so on major issues, the UK was part of the decision and cooperated even in a very constructive way on establishing a stronger fiscal, economic and banking union in the Eurozone, because it was also in their interest. The more there is stability in the Eurozone, the better for the British economy. So I cannot complain, not at all, on British cooperation in these areas. They made the choice not to be part of what we call the Fiscal Compact Treaty. They are now alone. They are not part of the deal. They were together with the Czech Republic, but the Czech Republic changed its mind. Of course, they didn't vote, it is well known, in favor of the next European Commission President, but we had a vote, and it's one of the few occasions where we have voted, and we had not to take the decision unanimously. We had voted, it was a clear vote. It was Britain alone with Hungary. But afterwards, we agreed also on the 5 priorities for the next years, and I mentioned them. This is the program agreed with all the 28 member states. So on substance, we agreed what to do in the upcoming 5 years. We had this difference of opinion on the next, or about the next Commission President, but even that, I think everybody accepted now after the composition of the Commission, the leadership of Jean-Claude Juncker. Under my successor, we took a unanimous decision. We took a unanimous decision also on the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and security issues. So overall, being Britain not being a member of the Eurozone, not being a member of the Schengen zone, overall there was a strong cooperation of Britain, certainly when we had to stabilize the Eurozone. We got also an agreement on a very difficult topic with Britain on the European budget. The European budget was agreed after 50 hours of negotiation, was agreed with the 28, including the UK. Of course, the future, we will see what the future brings. Here, the statement made by David Cameron about a referendum and so on, he made this statement as a leader of the Conservative Party. First, you need elections, and then after the elections, we'll see who is the winner. If he can continue, he said, I will renegotiate, or I will negotiate with the Union about what the place of Britain in the Union could be, and then I would put it on a referendum, and if there is an agreement after those negotiations, I will defend the result of those negotiations. We are not that far. In any case, I leave this to my successor, to Donald Tusk, and I wish him good luck. On Georgia, on the membership, let's first implement the association agreement. First things first. It is a major breakthrough, the association agreement, with Moldova, with Georgia, and with Ukraine. When I was in Georgia, I was asked also about what is the future after the association agreement. So I never answer hypothetical questions. Let's give you strong advice to all of you not to answer that kind of questions. But at that time I gave this answer, that this association agreement is not the last stage of our cooperation. On Serbia and the Western Balkans, one of my priorities as European Council President was the integration of the Western Balkans in the European Union. We welcomed already Croatia as a 28 member state. We are negotiating with Montenegro, and we accepted Serbia as a candidate country, and we are open negotiations with Serbia. Of course, they have to comply with the acquis communautaire, and it will take time, but at least there is a perspective. And after all what happened 15 or 20 years ago, I consider this as a major success. And also the normalization, and I know how difficult it is with Kosovo, that they overcame this taboo, and they started negotiations. Negotiations, by the way, between the two prime ministers, never seen, never expected 10 years or even 5 years ago. So this is part of the reconciliation in the Western Balkans, and is part of the overall reconciliation in Europe. This union was built on reconciliation, and after the war we reconciled, let's say, among the 6 countries, and after the civil war in former Yugoslavia, there is now a process of reconciliations also going on. And so it is completely in line with the culture of the European Union, but again, we will see where the negotiations brings us. Our relations with Russia, of course it is a neighbor. It was, it is, and it still be a neighbor. And we had strong political relations with Russia before what happened in Ukraine. We had even twice a year a summit with the Russian leader, Medvedev, and afterwards Putin. Last meeting took place in January of this year. After all what that happened, the next meeting was postponed. Not forever, not forever. And even if we put sanctions, sanctions are not a goal in themselves. Sanctions are an instrument to bring also Russia to the negotiating table and to make a deal not only on ceasefire, that's important of course, but also on peace and stability in that part of the world. Of course, they have to respect the territorial integrity of it and the sovereign choice of Ukraine to have a closer association with the European Union. But in our view, there is no contradiction between good neighborly relations with Russia and having closer links via an association agreement with the European Union. For us, and there are not only vain words, we think it is that we can realize that we can achieve this. But before we can achieve this, we have to restore a confidence of trust. And re-establishing trust is by keeping its promises, by keeping its commitments. And we are not fully there yet. But our intention is not to have a permanent confrontation, not at all, with Russia, but good neighborly relations, but based on international law and based on negotiations, including Ukraine, and let Ukraine live the life they want to live. Of course, we have in the Union differences, all kinds of differences, between the East and the West, in the North and the South, poor countries and richer countries, with different economic interests, with different histories and so on. But that is the challenge to agree. And I come from a country which is not an easy country. It is Europe in a nutshell. Because we also in our country have two kinds of cultures, going beyond language. And we have each time to agree between the North and the South. It's not because it's a small country that it cannot be relevant for the European Union as a whole. So we're used to deal with different languages, different cultures, also cultures in, let's say, on economic policies, on why societies are organized. But we did. We are doing this for 200 years. And even it takes some time for making a government. We are now only at the 4th month, so no panic. There's no panic needed at all. But we will, each time we surprise the world that we can agree and that we can even be one of the most prosperous countries in the world, having those two different cultures in one nation. And that's why a president of a small country, be it Luxembourg or Belgium, is well prepared for sharing European meetings. Of course, that will not prevent that people from other countries can be as able as we are, but it is in our genes. So we created in the Union this feeling of compromise, as I said. Of course, we have to take into account in each of the countries the specific identities of countries. If you don't respect identities, you will get in trouble sooner or later. Sooner or later. But that's the responsibilities for the member states. But the Union keeps together, and it is a work of the 28 member states, but in each member state you have to reach out to the different peoples, languages, specificities, identities, to respect them, so that it is in some way there is more cohesion and more harmony within our countries. I'm now speaking in a very general way, not thinking at specific situations at all, but that is the general line to take. But that's my final word. When you speak with people all around the world, they consider what we are doing in the European Union as a model for their continents. Bringing people together of 23, 24 languages, so many countries, histories, and achieving results. A common market, a common currency, on most issues now also, the difficult ones, also on Ukraine and on sanctions, having a common foreign policy. And I know it is also sometimes a little bit confusing, sometimes it's a cacophony, but each time at the end we delivered. So Europe is made step by step. But when you have the sum of all those steps, and we look at the result, I say it is a major event in human history. And when we listen to others, we can be proud of what we achieved. Of course, it's not the end of the way, but we can be proud of what we achieved. And that's the main message I will deliver to my successors. Continue this historic endeavor. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you so much for delivering this incredible speech.